the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but do not ever quit. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the clouds of doubt.
Bismillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a brand new episode of Let's Talk. I'm your host, Khalil Amunet, and joining us, we're honored to have Eric Wahlberg. He's a journalist and a writer for Al-Ahram Weekly. Welcome.
Thank you, Khalil.
You're welcome. And our in-studio guests, as always, welcome. Thank you for being here. We'd like to start off by saying, I'll give a little bit of introduction. We as Muslims need to re-examine ourselves, our past, our present, in order to figure out where we're going in the future as an Islamic society. So, I'd like to start off with this question. Is the future of Islam that of reformation or revolution through violence? Is it going to be, in your opinion?
Of course,
I mean, reformation through elections, political movements, organization by the people that are not necessarily violence.
Yes, there should definitely be an Islamic presence in the political and economic sphere. This is something that the West does not really want. It wants Muslims just to be off on the side, have some rituals that really do not affect daily life. So this is not an option for Muslims.
Yeah, the rituals do affect daily life, but I suppose we're talking more about in the political world. Muslims, the West wants Muslims to basically stay out of the economic sphere. And
the principles of Islam should not be part of the economy. But that is not possible. One of the prime pillars of Muslim faith is to prescribe usury or interest.
Yes.
And this is really at the heart of the economic world and at the heart of the problem of the economic world today. It's really bankers and the use of money to create money that is really at the heart of the world economic crisis today. So the idea of Muslims not protesting this is not a reasonable one. Muslims should be able to keep their faith because the faith will protect them in economic terms and is an important part of solving the world's economic crisis.
Also, paying zakat is a pretty important thing that maybe a lot of Muslim countries don't enforce.
Zakat, also the charity,
Yes.
is a way of equalizing income that is necessary way of dealing with poverty. If there had been proper zakat here in Egypt over the last few decades, perhaps the extreme poverty would not have been experienced and the political system might have survived. But
there would be an even distribution of wealth, and there's such a huge gap between rich and poor, and especially in the Islamic world. I mean, you'll see very, very rich, and then there's very, very poor. There's like very small middle class, which is pretty important.
Yes. These principles, economic principles, are important ones and are really lacking from the Western world's Christian and Jewish tradition. So I think Islam has a very important role to play in the world in terms of the world's economy. In terms of violence that is associated with Islam, this is really a false association. This is something that is maybe in the last 30 years or so there's been this problem of violent Islamists. And we can trace this actually to the use of Islamists by the British in the 19th century in cultivating Islamists. They wanted to control the Middle East. As the Ottoman Empire was declining, the British were moving in. They formed alliances with the Wahhabi, the Al Saud, and also with the Hashemites, with the idea of the two contenders for the control of the holy sites. They supported both sides.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Saudi group eventually took control of the holy sites. But the Hashemites got a consolation prize by becoming the king of Jordan and the king of Iraq. So the British were playing these games with Islamists.
But what the British offered them was a united Arab sort of state.
With both Hashemites and Saud together?
I'm not sure, but it was...
They were at loggerheads, the two groups, as far as my understanding.
No, but I mean, the promise wasn't cutting up into all these small countries. They more wanted a sort of like a united Arab...
The British did?
No, that's the trick. That was the trick. That was the offer in the first place, I think.
Because in fact the British were very much interested in
dividing
and conquering. That's what they did with the Ottoman Empire. By the end of World War I, the British were in a position to then take over the very key
Jerusalem,
the Middle East countries that were part of its scheme of world empire.
Yeah.
So the British, of course, empires rise and fall, and the British had bankrupted themselves, largely to the hands of bankers. So they fell foul of the banking system, the world banking system at that point, and went bankrupt. And at that point, the U.S. is in the rise. And in the 1930s, the U.S. gets a contract with the King of Saudi Arabia and moves in, and after World War I, to control the oil. And there, even though the U.S. doesn't really approve, or the U.S. Culture does not approve of the very strict Saudi culture of Wahhabism, they were happy to let it thrive and continue because of the close alliance for oil. So the Islamists in the past have been used by both the British and the Americans to promote unwittingly foreign ends. This came to a crisis point with the jihad against the Soviet Union when Afghanistan had a revolution in '79, which was not a Soviet revolution, but it was supported because Soviet Union because it was a socialist revolution. At that point, the U.S. created the situation where it was
paying
and supplying arms, both in conjunction with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, who were enemies, and even with China, communist China. This became a terrible misuse of Islam in the political sphere, and it was in order to destroy communism. But these people that are Muslims, I think, were misused. They were led astray by the Americans and by the British through this period, and this created an environment that gave rise to this kind of fanaticism that now is
biting us in the back.
Yes, it's a blowback to the Muslim world, and it's a result of not having a clear understanding of the world economic system and how Islam can play a positive role in the system. It played a negative role, unfortunately, through the last 30 years with this rise of Al-Qaeda, and which was backed by the United States and Afghanistan. It's unclear to what extent the U.S. still supports these violent extremist groups, but I think there's indications that it is. Even as it fights them in Afghanistan, it creates the conditions in Iraq for them to grow, and perhaps even provides funding elsewhere where it finds its own interests. For instance, Uyghurs in China, who are supported by the U.S. as an anti-Chinese political strategy.
So your view, I mean, I don't know, I've never heard of the West supplying Al-Qaeda with anything, but perhaps because the U.S. in Iraq is giving money to basically the Iraqi local government,
Mhm.
and through them, the Al-Qaeda is sort of being supplied, but not. I don't think it's sort of direct.
Well, in '79,
Intentional.
well, when the U.S. announced,
I'm talking about the current situation in Iraq and Afghanistan.
The Al-Qaeda was created in
In the
in 1980, 1981, and Bin Laden was on the pay of the U.S. at that point. So it certainly it supported them all through the 1980s, and huge amounts of arms and financing. So just the idea that they would cut it off automatically is a bit suspicious. I mean, it was very important and very much part of U.S. policy then. And also it serves the interests of Israel to have these kind of small violent occurrences that you can point your finger at the Muslims and say, oh, they're violent.
Oh, yeah.
So I think there's a lot of double take here. You can't be sure exactly who's the major supplier, but there's a lot of misuse of Islam in the world of politics. And I think it's important for Muslims to realize that and to create a platform and to be active politically in a positive way, in an upfront way. I know, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood in the past, there were instances in the 30s and the 40s of violence, but it was when it was fighting in British imperialism. And perhaps some of these Islamists were swept up under Sadat and even Mubarak in the war against the Soviet Union. So Muslims have been led astray. But I know that this Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, today strongly rejects violence as
it's more of trying to reform the way of life
and of working in the political process, the electoral process. So I think that there is a real future for reform. And
through peaceful measures.
Through peaceful measures, and I think the violence, I think it's something that's always going to be around, but it's, Well, it's an economic phenomenon. It's a reaction to the occupation of Muslim lands by non-Muslim, by the imperialist United States, in the past by Britain. The resentment that this creates gives rise to violence. And who are the most violent actors in the political scene today? It is the United States. It's killing hundreds, if not dozens, if not hundreds every day in Afghanistan. And as a result of its occupation of Iraq, it's created the situation where a country is engulfed in violence that is at least partly or largely due to the U.S. intervention there.
Oh, okay, we're going to take a short break right now, and we'll get back to this point after the break.
Learn Arabic. As everyone knows, today Arabic is considered as very important, very significant language. How can we produce the sound, the state of voicing, place of articulation, the manner of articulation? So in Arabic, the words which are written are pronounced.
We will learn how to write and pronounce Arabic letters correctly in depth. Explanation via board and presentation with many other important factors.
And we have today more than 300 million people speak Arabic language. Not only in the Middle East, but you can find a lot of people speak Arabic language in Asia, Europe, North America, and in South America.
What are you waiting for? Grab your notebook and pencil and stay tuned for Learn Arabic at Huda TV.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We were just talking about in the last segment the Reformation in the East for the Islamic world, some of it's through violence, and we're seeing some peaceful protests that lead to change. But now we're going to move to a pretty important part of the world, the West. Islam in the West is growing and continues to grow and is largely very peaceful. There's been some, I think, some terrorist attacks, but pretty minor. I mean, I'm talking about after September 11th. So, how can we convince the people of the West, the non-Muslims, that the growing Muslim population is a positive thing, not a negative thing?
Okay, there are several ways that this can happen. First of all, the distinctiveness of Islam as a way of life, as opposed to just being a Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning or Saturday activity in the case of Christian or Jewish traditions in the secular West. I think that is attractive to people. People want more of a sense of morality in their lives. The corruption in the Wall Street and the Western world of finance and business really disgusts a lot of people, and it's because it is an amoral world. So this aspect of Islam, that it is a way of life, I think that appeals to people.
And we stick to our morals instead of just going for the money, like you were talking about usury and how Islam promotes no usury.
Right, that should be. I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the Muslim world as well, but if people do see and take their Islam seriously, they will make this a part of the political process. Part of the problem, part of the problem, say, in Egypt was that it was a kind of phony Islam that was promoted officially, that what was happening was a U.S.-sponsored dictatorship that was sucking up the wealth of the society, and on the surface there was a pretense of Islam. I mean, the people were devout themselves, but on a government level.
It was basically a secular government.
It was a secular government in the Western tradition. So now that with the revolution in Egypt, there is a great hope that through the Islam-oriented parties, that Islam will become an important part of the economic life. The Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, is very strong against corruption, and very strong also in social support, in health, hospitals, in improving education, that there should be a basic minimum for people. So this sounds socialistic, but it's really just Islamic, that people need
need help from others, it's not just yourself. But anyway, I think we were talking about more of in the Western's perspective.
Okay, getting back to the West.
Yeah.
So, well, this could be an example. I just wrote a piece this week for Al-Ahram, and in the States they like the idea of a revolution here, but they see it in Western secular terms, that it's just going to create a secular government that will ape American traditions. But I wrote that in the West they say, will Venezuela be the next Egypt? Because they don't like Venezuela because it's socialist. So I turned that around and I said, well, will Egypt be the next Venezuela? Will Egypt turn to a more socialist path? Now that, and with the Muslim, this idea of zakat and social welfare and anti-corruption, these are principles also of socialism. So I think it's good to have a very open, civilized Muslim presentation in a democratic system. You really don't see that. Iran to some extent, but it is totally Islamic, and it's in a very difficult situation. I hope that Egypt will become a kind of symbol for the world of how Islam can play a very positive role in the political life of the nation.
But I mean, will that lead to discrimination, perhaps against other religions?
I don't see that at all. I think that during the revolution, we saw Christians and Muslims united. I know there have been some sectarian violence just in the last week here, but it's not even clear if this was something that might have been perpetrated by plainclothes police who are still
from the
former regime, trying to instigate further disruptions. But I think an open political process will take away that resentment and anger that people felt under Mubarak, where they could not express themselves politically and openly, and that where sectarian tensions became kind of substitute for letting off steam. So I don't think that's so much a problem. So politically, I think Islam has this role to play, and I think if this can be made clear in the West, it can be seen as a positive force in overcoming the world's economic problems.
Do you see some sort of Islamic political parties happening in the West? Is something like that going to happen?
Well, no, because, for instance, in the States, there are about 5 million Muslims, which is more than there are Jews in the States. But the Muslims have not a very high profile, and to have a Muslim party really doesn't make sense.
There are two congressmen who are Muslim.
There are.
But yeah, I agree with you.
They're not there because they're Muslims. They're there as Democrats, I believe.
Yeah. Well, they are Muslim, and they speak out for Muslim causes, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But especially in the West, how are Muslims going to improve themselves? How do they prove to their Western, the non-Muslim population, that they can lead successful lives and not cause any negative effect to the society?
Well, one thing about the Muslim community in the States is it's very multi-ethnic. There's no other religious affiliation that has such a broad spectrum of ethnicities within it. There's large black, large immigrant, large group from Middle East, from the Central or Southeast Asia, even Europe itself. So that there's a complete range. It's very non-racial, non-racist, and it does unite and bring people together. Also, another growing interest in the States is environmental issues, and there's a recent book called Green Dean by Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, a black American, and he looks at the traditions of Islam, Tawhid, the unity we have with nature, the ayat, the signs of God in the nature, through nature, amana, the trust we have in the Khalifa to look after the world and keep it whole, and also adl, which is the idea of social justice, and mizan, also to balance human needs with the needs of nature. So all of these aspects of Islam are very important to providing a solution to the world's environmental problems today.
But are we really? Do you see Muslims in the present right now really doing enough as far as the environment?
Maybe not here so much, although one of the wonderful things about the revolution here was afterwards people volunteered to come and clean up, which is probably the first time in a revolution that the people
decide to
clean up after themselves. So that's a nice sign. And also, in the States, I think Muslims do play a positive role in the environmental movement, and they are integrating with their more secular environmentalists, providing that spiritual dimension that is perhaps lacking. That the environmental movement has been in the States or in the West has been one of getting legislation, getting new laws, making people follow certain levels of pollution, or no littering, or companies. But that is a kind of soulless approach. You need more than just the negative restraints. You need people to want to find that unity with nature, to love nature, to feel the hurt inside when you see an animal species wiped out, or when you see an oil spill destroying, for instance, the Gulf as it was last year, the Gulf of Mexico.
And I think Muslim households should take part, through things like solar power, making their lives green as possible. Not just, we're going to clean up, not litter, and finding ways through technology. But we're going to go to the audience and see if they have any questions. Go ahead.
Eric, I have a question for you regarding the recent and ongoing tumultuous events all across the Arab world. And obviously, I guess we're sort of seeing inevitable end to autocratic rule across the Arab world. Would you project something in the future, perhaps the borders being realigned, perhaps, across the Arab world?
Well, I think one dream that perhaps we all have is the idea of a caliphate, the idea of Muslims somehow uniting, not in terms of nationalism, but in terms of creating a world that has a spiritual governance. And so I'm all for that. And how that can be brought about, in a sense, we can do that virtually with our internet connections, so that government itself is beginning to lose its national control because of the internet. So we all can keep working together in our community, think locally, act globally. That's a principle that can be used by Muslims to create a virtual caliphate around the world. And I think that also this revolutionary period in the last month or so has, well, I hope it continues, as you say, to lead an end to autocratic rule. Certainly the face of Egypt was raised hugely as a result of the revolution. People marvel around the world and respect greatly Egyptians for their bravery and for their selflessness in confronting the injustices. So I think that if Muslims can become a kind of symbol for other nations, and if we have this idea of a caliphate, not maybe in a physical sense, but or maybe in a physical sense in the final act, but certainly in a virtual sense, this could be a great move forward.
So you see as the unification through like internet, media, Muslims are concerned with each other more than they were perhaps in the past when there wasn't that connection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So do you guys have any other questions? Anybody? I'd like to bring up the point also, when you look in the history of, like you were talking about the caliphate, as the Islamic empires became more and more economically prosperous, they sort of lost sight of the spiritual aspect of ruling and living their lives in the so-called Muslim empire. What is your opinion, I mean, on the economic side of this?
You're suggesting that if a country gets too rich, it becomes kind of decadent and
like if they lose sight, especially
spiritual.
Like when you look like the Ottoman Empire, why did it decline? It was mostly because of after they became more and more wealthy, they just lost sight of the original mission, and I mean I'm just trying to find out, because we talk about the economic disparity of the Muslim world especially, and if it improves its economy or the economics, if the social status of Muslims all over the world increases, we'll sort of become more powerful and have a bigger voice. But does that lead also to negative, where we become obsessed with money, greed,
and lacks about the spiritual
side?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. Ottoman Empire, why did it decline? I guess partly it was the rise of the West too, that and the growing strength. The great difference, I think, between the Muslim world and the Western world. The Western world ended up finding its salvation through not through faith in religion, but faith in progress. This whole tradition of progress from over the last 600 years, the post-Enlightenment project of increasing wealth, increasing education, exploring, developing. There was an attempt to conquer the world, and that has kind of reached its zenith, you could say, today, and we can see a decline. Whereas the Muslim world seemed to fall into decline earlier, did not really pursue this aggressive way of finding salvation through progress. Salvation was through faith. So maybe there's a positive side to that as well, that I think people in the West, the Western tradition has destroyed as much as it's created. Whereas without that whole tradition, the world would be in a much better situation now, just because it wouldn't have all the ecological disasters that have been created as a result of the
economic.
So I'm a little bit cynical about progress as a be all and end all.
Yeah.
And in terms of decline of, I guess, social orders rise and decline in the real world. Where nothing's perfect in the real world.
There may be a balance between the two.
The Prophet says that both he creates fitna among us as well in order that we overcome it.
Yeah.
But, I'm not sure exactly what the ayat is, but there is this element of imperfection in the real world that, and faith is the way to deal with that. So it really, whatever stage our society is in, and if it's in the ascendant or it's in its decline, we have to deal with that within our own personal.
And it's a natural cycle of the world.
Yes, there's natural cycles.
Okay, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Dear viewers, Hoda programs can be watched in the English section of the in-flight entertainment directory on board all Saudi airline flights, domestic and international. Sit back, relax, and enjoy watching Hoda's entertaining and enlightening shows on your trip. Hoda wishes you a safe and successful journey. Hoda, a light in every home.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. We're joined in the studio by another guest, Sharif. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
just
too.
Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Well, my name is Sharif Abdel Nasser. I'm originally American, born in New York, and my mom was a convert, a Christian convert. She thought it was a good idea if we were raised in Egypt.
Yeah.
So we could pick up the language. And so thus we can be able to also pick up the religion and learn the religion. So I've been here in Egypt pretty much steadily, since I was, you could say, 4th grade. Most of my education was here, both in public and private schools. Some schools had mixed English curriculums. Some schools were totally Arabic.
So I mean, when you think about the future of Islam, what do you see, how do you see yourself? What kind of, you're a young man, what place do you think young men like you will have in it?
Well, I think that it's the burden of the youth, the Muslim youth, to really take the initiative of the reformation, real good Islamic reformation, the way we need it to be, because there's a lot to be done in that case, because we as the youth are being exposed to many cultures all over the world, and many thoughts, many new ideas, education from all over the world that is really, really beneficial if we would just start to take it in perspective of how can we advance ourselves using this, and thus try to utilize it to sort of bring back the Sunnah and bring back, the kind of ideal circumstance that Islam was all about bringing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about education. You're talking about how you came here to improve your Islamic education. And you came to
idea.
You came to Egypt from the West. Is that something that you think is important, that Western Muslims come back to the East to learn? And I mean, do you see yourself especially going back to the West to participate and to spread Islam?
Well, I don't think that it's necessary per se to come to the Middle East.
Yeah.
What I think is necessary instead is that Muslims learn Arabic.
Yeah.
Because it's the language of the religion. It's the language of the religion, and the religion is codified in its basis in Arabic.
Yeah.
So if we want to be able to keep the religion pure, I think number one and most important thing is that Muslims need to learn Arabic. Be it stay in the West, be it in the East, wherever, just learn Arabic. It's not actually that beneficial if they come to like the Middle East, to tell you the truth, because my opinion is we have a lot of problems in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We have a lot of problems. And, new Muslims sometimes when they come to the Middle East and they find these problems, not realizing that they actually have secular origins and origins in cultural problems, not per se religious problems, it starts to maybe get to them.
And wear you down and make you feel
Yeah, it starts to wear you down, and when you go back to the West or wherever you're from, and you have only these kind of sad stories to say, it doesn't really help much. It doesn't really help much, especially within the context of, again, if you don't know the language, you can't discover for yourself what Islam was supposed to be like.
Yeah.
And therefore see the amount of stray that we are in right now.
But I mean, but negative aside, it was a good idea for you to come here. And because I mean, how are you going to learn Arabic if you need immersion? So I think maybe you shouldn't regret it so much.
No, I don't regret it. No, I don't regret it at all. It's actually a very good thing, put within the proper context of trying to keep away from the cultural problems that people have.
Exactly.
See, that's the problem. What I'm saying is that a lot of people, sometimes, they either get culture shocked out of, liking the experience at all, or what's even worse sometimes, they actually start to pick up the same kind of problems that a certain culture has.
And then you're bringing the negatives of
the
Eastern Muslim and
to the
sort
West,
of losing the positive aspect of being Muslim.
Give us
in
an
America.
example. What do you mean by the problem that
See, for example, here's the thing. The main problem I find with Islam in general that looking towards the future of Islam, we'll probably have to find a remedy for, is the fact that there is no established culture which you can look at and say this is an Islamic culture. This is Islam's product.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem. What we have here is a whole bunch of national cultures. It used to be Arabian, now it's basically national cultures, where everybody has their own way of doing things and has their own traditions that kind of base how they start to interact with people, and even it starts to actually provide the basis of the kinds of problems they have, the kinds of phenomenological variables they deal with in their lives.
But I mean, so for the future of Islam, what do you? We're divided up into different cultures. That's so natural, though. But of course, going back to the pure Islam, does that contradict with culture?
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is, yes, to a certain extent, that's actually the problem. The problem is that, generally speaking, just like how you said, as human beings, culture is a human nature.
Yes.
We normally acculturate to be able to be familiar with what everybody else is doing around me, so therefore I could be able to understand people in the correct context, and that's how culture is different.
Natural.
That's natural. But the problem is, if we want to stay Islamic and keep on the Sunnah, we really need to be able to one of the first steps, to be able to find out these specific variables of how we base culture, and then try to put the Islamic Sunnah, alternatives, and keep sure that it's these Sunni alternatives that are filling in these cultural needs and gaps.
Do you have like an example, like where what you're speaking about, where culture interferes with religion?
Yeah. Well, just like how Brother Eric just asked, an example where culture interferes with religion is the role of women.
Yes.
For example, the role of women. Here we have in the Arab countries, well, not too generally, but at least from where they come from in like rural areas, and their basic traditions are really kind of where they keep the women aside.
Yeah.
Okay, women are kind of defined as something that we keep in the house. It's they
don't work.
It's too everything. Almost everything is improper.
Yeah.
There's just too much, and of course it varies from national culture to national culture. Some cultures are kind of more open-minded than others, but that's an example where, for example, in Saudi Arabia, the fact that women can't drive a car, okay, for example.
Well,
that's something. This is an instance. This is an instance where.
So you think women should be more part of the social life?
Of course,
integrated.
as long as they keep within their boundaries that the Prophet ﷺ gave them to have. Like for example, if the woman is wearing a niqab, for example, if a woman is wearing a niqab, what's the problem of her working? Okay, she has on her niqab. She prays at the time she prays.
That's common here, though, isn't it?
Exactly. That's common, alhamdulillah, in Egypt. Yes. But again, this is a problem. But what I'm saying is, people, because of culture, sometimes they kind of mix their cultural morality around with understanding religion, and trying to utilize religion to actually propagate their cultural morality, and not the reverse. Okay? But there's a very thin line here that we need to figure out, because it's not as easy as me just saying we need to fix this problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
so when you're talking
that should be the starting point.
When you're talking about like driving,
thinking about for the future.
When you're talking about like driving, there's a problem. There's no Islamically, it's 100% permitted for women to drive, and that law is just some sort of a cultural cultural deterrence. Let's see.
If I can put another example, like for example, another example is. This whole mix that some Muslims have with dress code, even for like men, for example. Okay, in some cultures, men dress a certain way that in other cultures could be interpreted differently. Like for example, one culture might say
I've heard that.
Yeah, this certain kind of way is actually what women in our culture wear.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of really, looking at your dress.
Yeah.
Okay. In a cultural context, and that's why culture in a certain way is
for example,
really
like different colors that are
different colors, different style, different styles, and things like that. All of these things, the factor that we still as Muslims accept to acculturate our clothes by appearance and national uniform, rather than by certain rules that the Prophet ﷺ put as limits, not as specific forms of how to wear clothes. Okay.
So like dressing feminine or something like that, there's certain clothes that men aren't supposed to wear. But some cultures, this color is considered feminine, or, and it really doesn't have anything to do
why
with
complicate our, what do you call it, our human, capacity
even
to wear
chewing bubble
clothes.
gum is considered feminine in some cultures.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Can you compare and contrast, since you're a Muslim both in the West and the East, can you compare and contrast what you see going on there, the reform there and the reform here?
Well, basically speaking,
what do you see changing in America?
Here's the common. I'd like to start with what's common.
Okay.
Okay. What's common is that, be it here or in the U.S., you have a lot of sort of activist groups.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, like for example, in the East here, we have the Ikhwan, we have Salafis, we have Dawah and Tabligh. They exist at various degrees in the West also, but we also have CARE in the United States, and we have these other groups.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're more of social.
Yeah, they kind of
political.
try to subject Islam to activism. Okay, in order to first improve its status, with people, and also to advance, its propagation and things like that. The problem, however, is there isn't a manhaj. There isn't a certain what do you call it, way that is arrived at, through method, scientific method, or like any kind of academic method.
Yeah.
Okay, and how to codify going about things. So therefore, what we do have in the end is a whole bunch of activist groups. Some of them have ideas that are contradictive to other than what you have basically is confusion.
Well, I mean, there's different organizations for different things. For example, you said CARE. CARE is a great organization when it comes to standing up for Muslims' rights.
CARE is a great.
They provide legal services that are free of charge when things like discrimination against Muslims come up. They pay for legal fees.
CARE is a great organization when it comes to that, but when it comes to keeping the religion as the Prophet ﷺ wanted, Sunnah, and also in when it comes to propagating the religion in a correct way that doesn't deceive people,
yes.
CARE is pretty bad. So but that's the thing. Okay, we don't have a leadership, and that's the second thing we need to think about when it comes to reform, and that is leadership.
Well, I mean, leadership. Okay, let's go to Eric for that. Leadership. He's saying that Muslims have to have some sort of a unifying way of thought that because there's all these organizations with different kinds of different sort of like goals that are contradictory toward each other.
Well,
is there some sort of a cure for that, or some sort of?
Well, I think we should wait, or not wait, but we will see here in Egypt now. I think this is a great opportunity. It's kind of a hothouse for democratic Islam. Now you've got a large, well-educated population that is devout. Largely, I hope. I don't know how much under the last 30 years it's that penetration of Western morality has taken place. But I think we need to see the emergence of positive figures. I mean, the only political figure of note that someone like this Ahmadinejad in Iran, who is a devout and very articulate, very intelligent person, a very kind of severe leader too. I mean,
a little bit extreme though.
He is a kind of symbol for a lot of people, and people, I mean, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
I think that I hope that we can see that kind of leadership in the political sphere arising here. In terms of a way of life,
Ahmadinejad type figure.
Well,
didn't the Iranian people revolt against Ahmadinejad, and he put them down using violence?
The main revolt, is I see it, was in 1979 against the Shah.
No. But before the revolutions in the Arab world, there's something happened in Iran.
No, it was 2 summers ago. Well, that's a very complicated situation because it was largely something that was a continuation of U.S.-inspired color revolutions that had taken place in Georgia and Serbia and Iran and Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan. It's very much part of a wave, and the demonstrators there.
They were basically against the Iranian government enforcing, very, very strict interpretation of Islamic
Islam.
law, like
yes,
forcing women to wear a niqab, or and beating people on the streets for doing certain things.
Iran has a very complicated history. It went through a 10-year war with Iraq as well. It's been under constant sanctions from the United States for 30 years now. It's living in a very tense environment, and it's not surprising that those tensions are there within the society. There isn't the same room for relaxation. But also that might be a warning to Sharif's idea that we need a clear Islamic way of life, unifying, because in a way that's what the Islamic regime in Iran tried to, and it's a popular regime. I don't believe that the elections were falsified in 2009. I think all opinion polls showed Ahmadinejad with a clear majority. And I think that a lot of the negative Iran propaganda is very much a U.S. inspired, and perhaps the Shia-Sunni differences also.
On that,
maybe we should
break.
leave
Yeah.
leave Iran. Very controversial topic, but in a way I would say that I sympathize with the idea that there should be a greater
perhaps a balance between making laws that they're not really Islamic, like he said.
This is actually what I'm
Islamic
saying.
laws.
We have a serious paradigm
Okay,
problem.
we have to take a break right now. Sorry, we don't have any time. Let's go for a break.
You have questions that bother you. What about issues of concern to you? Would you like to share things on your mind with us? Are you interested in solutions based on an Islamic perspective? Please join me live in Meet Your Advisor every Friday at 9 p.m. Mecca time, here on Huda TV.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We only have a few minutes left, so we're going to go to the audience for some comments. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I have this question. Do you think Islam evolves according to the different situations we live in?
Very interesting question. The great thing about Islam is that it was the word of God to the Prophet given to us a long time ago, and it's still there. So we have clear vision of what Islam should be in the Quran, and the 5 pillars. And I read the Quran every day, and I always look for ways to find its how to fulfill it in my life. Now, to create a one way of governing all people for all time, that I don't think is what the Quran's about. I think the Quran's very much about a spiritual awakening that we then fulfill through our lives. So I know that's kind of hedging the question, but I think if we keep that in mind anyway, we won't get off the straight and narrow, the Sirata Mustaqim.
I kind of disagree with that, but yeah.
Okay, let's. Why do you disagree with that?
Well, I just want to say that generally speaking, I mean, even with the Prophet ﷺ's life, if you look at him as a ruler, and the Abu Bakr and Omar and Uthman and Ali, the Islamic ruler, has a very important role in dealing with 3 really basic questions that Muslims have, and any kind of believing in God community had since the beginning of history and until its end. And that is, number 1, staying within the boundaries of the Sunnah that the Prophet has.
Yeah.
Okay. The Prophet ﷺ, a lot of his legislation in a legal way, meaning he provided punishments, okay, was for keeping people within his Sunnah. Same thing, which is the second point, is dealing with jama'ah, having people staying as one group.
Yes.
Okay. Prophet ﷺ, a lot of his teachings, a lot of his also legal style enforcement was on the fact of how to keep people staying within jama'ah, okay, staying united. Okay. The third thing is fitna, dealing with fitna, how to deal with fitna. Okay. This is a legally solved question. You cannot deal with fitna or jama'ah or keeping the sunnah with non-legal terms. You can't deal it with spiritual terms.
Very
That's why rule is an essential part of
But it's also very important for you personally. And I think the point was that it's very hard. There's no unifying leader nowadays. Muslims are 1.6 billion. They're spread across the globe. There's not maybe in the future, inshallah.
But that's what I'm saying. Our future lies within
right
pursuing
now,
that.
it's sort of like he was saying. You have to read the Quran for yourself and to figure out within yourself the right way. Well, thank you, Sharif, for all of your very interesting comments. And you also, Eric Wahlberg, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
And thanks to our studio audience. I'd like to remind you guys with our email address, talk@huda.tv. And we're going to see you guys later. Thank you and goodbye.
When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but do not ever quit. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the clouds of doubt. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the